Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today our topic of discussion is the effects of aggregate demand management policies in Keynesian aggregate demand supply framework. So far we have discussed, we always considered ISLM framework. That means we considered only the commodity and money markets. So only the demand side. So now we will here introduce the supply side also, that represents the factor market. And then by the interaction of demand and supply, we'll again find out what will happen if the policies are adopted. So aggregate demand management policies are mainly of two types, and we have already discussed this thing several times. That one is the fiscal policy. So there are two instruments, either increase in public expenditure or a reduction in taxation. So first we'll discuss the fiscal policy and its effects on the output level, rate of interest, and the price level of the economy. So we start with the situation in which the government increases the public expenditure. And we know that the public expenditure is a component of aggregate demand. So whenever public expenditure rises, directly the aggregate demand will rise. So commodity market is in equilibrium. Now if we think about the interaction with the money market, what we see? Increase in aggregate demand, that means the transaction demand for a money, which is a KP price level into YD, this will increase. And if we start from an equilibrium situation in the money market, what we see? That this is the equilibrium condition. So whenever YD rises, given the money supply, and excess demand situation in the money market will be created. And now the money market mechanism will start. So we know that the money market and the bond market, they are interrelated. So any disequilibrium in the money market will call for a corresponding or consequent disequilibrium in the bond market also. So whenever the money market is suffering, there is an excess demand situation in the money market, that will imply an excess supply situation in the bond market. So consequently, what will happen? Bond price will rise and rate of interest will fall. So this decline in rate of interest will have two effects. Number one, we know that as rate of interest rises, the speculative demand, I have seen here, excess supply of bond means bond price will rise and bond price will decline and rate of interest will start to rise. So, and what we see here, as rate of interest rises, the speculative demand for money falls. And on the other hand, as rate of interest rises, the private investment will also decline, which we call the crowding out effect. So as crowding out effect happens, then aggregate demand will decline, and as aggregate demand declines, that means transaction demand for money, these will also decline. So this entire process, that excess demand in the money market, excess supply in the bond markets, decline in bond price, rate of interest rises, decline in speculative demand for money, and decline in private investment, and decline in transaction demand for money. The entire process will be continued unless the money market equilibrium is restored. So this is the reason we find here. So if I were discussing the only the commodity and money markets, I could have stopped here. But here we are considering the aggregate demand, aggregate supply, both. So whenever we see that the aggregate demand rises given the aggregate supply, so we find it there will be a gap, excess demand in the economy, which will cause an increase in the price level. So price level will start to hike from here whenever we find an excess demand situation in the economy, overall economy. So when the price level rises, that means what will happen? It will have two effects on the demand side and supply side. So according to the Keynesian theory, if we see the labor market with wage rigidity, downward rigidity of wage, whenever price level rises, what we see? Real wage will decline. And as real wage declines, demand for labor will increase. Effective demand for labor will increase, employment will increase, and given the production function, the supply will rise. So that's why the supply curve is upward sloping. So we are not going here to the details of the supply curve. We'll again come to the demand part. What will happen if to the aggregate demand if price rises? So this time what we will find that as price rises, so this will indicate, this will cause an increase in again transaction demand for money. So Kp into Y, if P rises, that means demand for money will again start to rise. So again we see that there will be an excess demand situation in the money market, and by the interaction with the bond markets, the rate of interest will start to increase further. And due to this rise in rate of interest, what we will find? So number one, in the commodity market, the private investment will again start to fall. So there will be a further crowding out effect. And on the other hand, the speculative demand for money will also fall. And due to crowding out effect, the aggregate demand will also fall. So the transaction demand for money, that means KPYD, will also fall. And again, this process is entirely continued unless we reach the commodity market equilibrium, money market equilibrium, and the overall equilibrium in the economy. So now we can show it, prove it graphically using a set of diagrams. So previously in the ISLM model, we draw only the IS curve and LM curve. But here in one diagram, we will show the ISLM curves, and another diagram will show the AD-AS curve. But this type of diagram, drawing diagram, we have to use some tactics to draw it. So that it becomes perfect. So what I'll do here, first I'll draw two diagrams. So in both cases, in the horizontal axis, Y stands for aggregate demand and rate of interest. Here the price and the total volume of output. So first we will not draw the AD-AS curve. First we will draw only the ISLM curves. AD-AS curve we will draw later for the sake of convenience. And it will also make it foolproof, make the diagram foolproof. So whenever we draw the diagram, first we will draw the IS curve and LM curve standard. So this is my IS curve I0 S0, and this is my LM curve L0 M0. So we initially start with a point when rate of interest is R0 and aggregate demand is Y0. And if we are starting from an equilibrium in the overall economy, then this will be plotted in this diagram. So initial point, we can say that initially AD and AS both equals to OY0. But we are not drawing the demand curve right now. I repeatedly say the demand curve and supply curves, demand curves and supply curve, will draw all these things later for the sake of simplicity. So what we see here, first there is an increase in the public expenditure. I'm considering the expansionary fiscal policy. So we can consider any one thing. Just we consider due to expansionary fiscal policy. So first what we see, aggregate demand rises from Y0 to Y star directly. So for time being, the commodity market moves from point A to point B. The economy moves from point A to point B. So if we look at the diagram, B is definitely indicates the equilibrium in the commodity market, but not disequilibrium in the money market. And it is below the LM curve. And we know that this indicates an excess demand for money. So definitely by the interaction of money and bond markets, rate of interest will start to rise. And whenever rate of interest starts to rise, there will be crowding out. Private investment will fall, and consequently the aggregate demand will also fall. So which is represented by a leftward movement across the new YS curve I1 S1. And the new equilibrium point will be achieved at C. So just because the government expands the public expenditure, just government is adopting an expansionary fiscal policy, economy will move from the aggregate demand will become Y0 to Y dash, and Y star Y dash, this is just now the crowding out effect. So what we do here, we just mark this Y dash also here, the new aggregate demand. And now we see that Y dash is the aggregate supply is right now OY0 and aggregate demand is OY dash. So this indicates this Y0 Y dash, this actually indicates the excess demand in the economy. Now we come here. So what we do say? We said that this type of excess demand in the economy will cause an increase in price. So, and in LM, what we see, LM curve equation, M bar equals to KPY plus LR. So, two variables are Y and R. So, P is definitely an exogenous variable. So, whenever P rises, we can see that the LM curve will shift in this way. So, what we can see? The final equilibrium rate of interest is, it will rise from R1. Better to shift it once more. This has become a little bit clumsy. So I'll just change the LM curve again. So let the IS curve be as it is. So these are two IS curves. So let us do it. This is the LM curve. Fine. This is my new LM curve is L1 M1. And this shift in L0 M0 to L1 M1, this is simply because of increase in the price level. So final equilibrium of the economy, rate of interest is from R0 to first it rises to R dash and finally it reaches to, R1. So this is the increase. And what we see here, ultimately the aggregate demand reaches to OY1. So we also draw this diagram. So first what we have to do now, how to draw the AD-AS curves. The simple tricks is that first draw one AD curve like this. So this is my initial AD curve. Now just take the parallel distance and draw the AD curve like this. So AD dash. And supply curve should be drawn in this way that intersection with the first AD curve gives the equilibrium output level OY0, and with the next AD curve, second AD curve gives the equilibrium OY1. So what can we do? We should draw the supply curve like this. It should pass through these 2 points. So we can write it G, H and I. So economy will move from G to H at this price level, G to H and H to I. So what we see here, finally, P0, P1. Finally, what we see here, that due to the expansionary fiscal policy, equilibrium level of output rises. And hence employment will also increase because the employment is determined by the level of output. So equilibrium level of aggregate output increases. Equilibrium price also increases. And third thing is that equilibrium rate of interest also increases from OR0 to OR1. But here is some adverse effect of the expansionary fiscal policy. Just see, first time we see that crowding out is from Y star to Y dash. This is the first crowding out because of the expansionary fiscal policy and the money market disequilibrium created. And now This is the y dash to y1. This is the second crowding out. Because of the increase in price level, there is an excess demand for money. Money market disequilibrium created. And that's why second crowding out. So fiscal policy definitely increases the output level, but it has an adverse effect on the private investment. So that's why this is the negative side of the expansionary fiscal policy. But what we see, sometimes the government does not have any other option except adopting the fiscal policy. I'll come to this part later. Now we'll show the how does the monetary policy work out, what is the effectiveness of monetary policy. So not effectiveness, what are the effects of monetary policy on the economy in the same framework, AD-AS framework. So first expansion aggregate demand management policy was expansionary fiscal policy, and second aggregate demand management policy is expansionary monetary policy. So if we start from the situation, the government is increasing the money supply, injecting more money in the economy. Government can use different instruments like credit creation or open market operation or different instruments. We are not much concerned about the instrument, but we are concerned about the effect of this monetary policy. So first, if the money supply rises, what will happen? So immediately it will create an excess supply situation in the money market. So as there is excess supply situation in the money market, there will be excess demand situation in the bond market, because people will go to try to purchase more bonds out of their extra money in the hand. So bond prices will rise, and consequently we know that if bond price rises, rate of interest will fall. So rate of interest fall will have two effects again. One, in the commodity market, what we see, it will boost up the private investment. That's very good fact about that. It will boost up the private investment. So if the private investment rises, aggregate demand will also rise, and consequently the demand transaction demand for money will also rise. So here, in rate of interest declines, the money effect on money market, we know that the speculative demand for money will rise, or the demand for idle cash will also rise. So what do we see? First, there is an excess supply situation created that is recovered by the increase in money demand, both components of money demand. So we find here this process will be continued unless the money market equilibrium is restored. So again I repeat that if we are considering an ISLM, only the ISLM model, that means commodity and money markets, only the demand side, we can stop here. But in this part, we are also considering the supply side factors. So this excess demand, this will create immediate increase in the aggregate demand, and given the supply, what we will find, there will be, so we can see that YS, that is constant, but YD is increasing. So that will create YD minus YS is greater than 0. We call it an excess demand situation in the economy, or inflationary situation. So this will happen whenever this will find this, the price level will start to increase. Quite natural. If the demand is greater than supply, price will increase by the demand supply interaction. So as the price increases, again we have to come back to the commodity and money market interaction. So demand for money is M bar equals to KP into YD plus LR. So P rises. So that means what? This will again call an money demand is greater than money supply. That means the excess demand situation in the money market. And we have already discussed that if there is an excess demand situation in the money market, the rate of interest will rise. So I am not repeating the same mechanism. I have already discussed it. So just to see that whenever the money demand, so excess demand situation in the money market, that means rate of interest will rise. And again we will have two things, that it will choke off the private investment, which we call the crowding out, and second thing is that ALR will decline, and due to crowding out, what we see, YD will decline, so transaction demand for money will also decline. So this process is continued. But one thing should be noted here, that whenever the government adopts the monetary policy, first there is a sharp decline in the rate of interest, and after that there is a rise in the rate of interest. But the decline in rate of interest due to increase in money supply is more than the rise in rate of interest due to increase in price. So the rise in rate of interest due to increase in money supply is greater than the decline in rate of interest due to the decline in private investment due to the increase in price level. So finally what we will see, the aggregate demand rises and the economy, and also whenever the price rises, the aggregate supply will also rise. So there will be extension of supply in the economy. And for money supply, increase in money supply, aggregate demand rises. There is a shift in the aggregate demand curve. And second time what we see, whenever rate of interest rises, the price level rises, the rate of interest will rise, crowding out will happen, that will be represented by a leftward movement across the same demand curve. So increase in aggregate demand due to increase in money supply is greater than the decrease in aggregate demand, sorry, not decrease, contraction in aggregate demand due to an increase in the price level. So finally, what we see here, the price level rises, the level of equilibrium, level of output rises, but rate of interest falls. So we can prove it here with the help of the diagram. Again, we use a set of diagrams, and here also we have to use some tactics to make the diagram foolproof. So as usual, here we consider commodity money market, and here we consider aggregate demand, aggregate supply. So here also we will so initially I0 is, sorry, this is L0, LM0 is our LM curve, and this is our IS curve. So what we see here, rate of interest is R0, equilibrium level is Y0. So we plot it here. So initially we start it, AD equals to aggregate supply equals to OY0. Now, the government increases the money supply. So the LM curve shifts and we define a new LM curve, L1, M1. So this LM curve is subject to the lower volume of money supply, that this LM curve is subject to the higher volume of money supply. So right now aggregate demand becomes OY2. OY2, okay. We write OY2. But what we see here, right now aggregate demand is OY2, aggregate supply is OY0. So Y0, Y2 indicates excess demand situation in the economy, inflationary situation. Price will start to rise and LM curve will shift leftward. So this is the point. So we can write here A, point B and point C. So first this is the shift of the LM curve due to increase in money supply. And now this is the shift in the LM curve due to increase in price. So ultimate equilibrium will be of the economy will be Y1. And rate of interest, first rate of interest falls to R2 and then it rises to R1. So now we will draw it, that is Y21 is the final equilibrium level of output in the economy. So again, so we have to use the tricks to draw the demand and supply curves. So what I will do, first I will draw my demand curve like this. So this is my AD0 and take the parallel part, write a parallel demand curve that is AD1. So what we have to do, we have to draw the supply curve. When it intersects with AD0, we get the equilibrium level of output OY0. And whenever it intersects the AD1, we will get the equilibrium level of output OY1. So this is my aggregate supply curve of the economy. So what we see here, initially just look that aggregate demand rises from Y0 to Y2. So Y0 to A2 aggregate demand rises. Excess demand created. Now how it is being solved? As the price level starts to rise, the LM curve shifts. The rate of interest rises. So as rate of interest rises, private investment declines. So this is represented by the movement from, if we write it, G, H and J. So movement from H to J indicates the impact of increase in price on the aggregate demand. This is a contraction of demand. First, this is an increase in demand and then it is a contraction of demand. So increase in demand is more than the contraction of demand, aggregate demand. And finally, what we see, J is the final equilibrium point. So price level rises from OP0 to OP1, output level rises from OY0 to OY1, and rate of interest falls from OR0 to OR1. This is the best part of the monetary policy. The monetary policy reduces the rate of interest, and as it reduces the rate of interest, it boosts up the private investment. So increase in private investment is always good for an economy, because number one, it is an injection, and number two, it boosts up the private sector. But problem is that sometimes in some extreme cases, we cannot adopt the monetary policy. The monetary policy becomes the completely ineffective. For example, if we consider the case of liquidity trap, the monetary policy will be completely ineffective. If we consider the case of the vertical private investment, that means investment is insensitive to the change in rate of interest, monetary policy will be ineffective. But still, whenever we compare between fiscal and monetary policy, and we can say in the normal situations, it is always better to adopt the monetary policy. And you can see in the diagrams here, monetary policy here causes an increase in the volume of private investment in the economy. So this here we conclude the effects of expansionary aggregate demand management policies, the effects of expansionary fiscal policy and expansionary monetary policy in an AD-AS framework. So what we see here, ultimately, the price level will rise, the aggregate demand will rise, the aggregate level of output will also rise. But whether the rate of interest will rise or fall, that depends upon the type of policy. Fiscal policy causes a rise in rate of interest, monetary policy causes a decline in rate of interest. And fiscal policy is always bad because it causes a crowding out effect, which is not good for an economy. The shrinking of the private investment is always a bad symbol for the economy. So monetary policy is better than the fiscal policy. So this is the all things. So if you think that it helps you in learning, so please like, share and subscribe my channel, and thank you for watching. We'll be back with our new video.